Eva Morgan's life is shattered when her fiancé, Liam, disappears under mysterious circumstances. 4 years later, a chance discovery of a video sparks a journey that unravels secrets buried in the darkest corners of Liam's past. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let us know your thoughts about the ending in the comments. Your support helps us create more deep and gripping stories just for you. There's more to come. The evening air was soft, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink as the sun began to sink below the horizon. The sound of the waves gently lapping against the shore was the only thing that filled the space between them. Liam, with a tremble in his hands, knelt down on the sand, the tiny grains sticking to his palms as he opened the small velvet box in front of Eva. The golden ring inside gleamed, reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. "Eva, you are my world," Liam said, his voice steady despite the knot in his throat. He looked up at her, his eyes brimming with anticipation. Eva stood frozen for a moment, as though the world had stopped spinning around them. The vast ocean stretched before her, the sky glowing in its fiery beauty, and for the first time in what felt like forever, everything felt right. This was the moment she had dreamed of, where every doubt, every hesitation fell away. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Yes, Liam." Her breath caught as Liam slid the ring onto her finger. The world seemed to dissolve into a blur of warmth, joy, and love. The soft crash of waves against the shore, the quiet hum of the evening, and the fire of the sunset were all wrapped in this single, perfect moment. She was his. He was hers. They embraced, their bodies pressed against each other as the last rays of sunlight slipped beneath the horizon. They held each other tightly, as though they were afraid to let go. For a fleeting second, Eva thought the world would never change, that they would be here forever, wrapped in this bubble of happiness. But then, as quickly as the moment had come, it began to unravel. Liam pulled away from the embrace, his eyes alight with a sense of excitement, as though something was calling him to the water. "I'll be right back, just a moment," he said, his voice full of energy. Eva watched him walk toward the water, the golden light catching the waves as they crashed along the shore. It felt like an eternity in just a few seconds. She turned back to look at the place where they had stood, her heart still beating fast from the proposal, from the ring on her finger. But then, something shifted, a slight movement, something in the air that made her turn back toward the water. But when she turned back to Liam, he was already gone. He had disappeared. Eva called his name, but the wind carried her voice away. The sound of the crash, the thundering waves, and her voice screaming his name were drowned out by the roaring sea. She ran toward the water, her feet sinking into the sand, but it was too late. The beach was silent except for the distant hum of the waves. There was no trace of him, no sign of the man she had just promised to spend forever with. Her heart raced, her mind racing even faster. She called his name again, her voice trembling now. She could hardly breathe, could hardly think. She waited. She searched. But Liam was gone. The police arrived shortly after, their faces set with professional masks as they combed the area, their searchlights casting long shadows across the sand. They found nothing. No body, no trace, just an empty stretch of beach. The conclusion was simple. Liam had drowned. The ocean had taken him, as it often did. There was no foul play, no signs of struggle, no reason to suspect anything other than a tragic accident. But Eva couldn't let go. Not then. Not ever. For the last 4 years, she had carried that night with her, haunted by the image of him disappearing into the waves, the final words of her yes echoing in her ears. The police had closed the case. The world had moved on. But she hadn't. The pain, the confusion, the loss, it was all still there, as fresh as the moment it happened. And she would never stop searching. 4 years had passed since the night Liam disappeared into the ocean. Yet for Eva, those years felt like nothing more than a haze, a collection of days, months, and seasons that blurred together in the absence of the man she loved. Now, she lived in a small, quiet suburban home in Braintree, just outside Boston. The house, A modest two-story building tucked between rows of similarly quiet homes felt more like a shelter than a home. She spent most of her time indoors, working from her home office as a freelance graphic designer. The walls were lined with art she had created, designs for clients who had long since moved on, and for herself, though they never truly filled the void. She had long since stopped updating her social media accounts, her photos, her life. Everything had gone still. Her world had gone still. The sound of the keyboard clicking beneath her fingers, the constant glow of the computer screen, it had become her rhythm, her routine. It was easier than facing people, easier than pretending everything was fine. The world outside seemed distant, like a life she no longer belonged to. Her friends, well-meaning but distant, kept telling her the same thing, as if it were a mantra, as if their words could make the pain go away. "You need to move on, Eva," Maya, her best friend, would say on the phone. Maya was the one who had stuck by her, though even she had begun to lose patience over the years. She had seen Eva retreat into herself, seen the way she refused to touch the past, or anything that might have once belonged to Liam. "You've spent 4 years grieving," Maya would continue, her voice tinged with worry. "It's okay to let go, to start fresh. Start fresh." What did that even mean? Eva wasn't sure if she even remembered how to start fresh. How could she let go of the man who had been her world? How could she move on when every day was still a reminder of the night he had disappeared? A night when she had promised him forever, only to have the ocean rip him away from her. How could she breathe without the suffocating ache of that absence? In the corner of the room, tucked away behind the couch where she rarely allowed herself to look, sat the box. The one she had never let anyone touch, never let anyone see. Inside it were Liam's things. The shirt he had worn when they first met, the books they had read together, a bundle of photographs, some of them from their travels, others from the mundane days when they had simply been happy. And there, at the very top, was the ring, the one he had placed on her finger that evening, the symbol of a future they would never have. She couldn't bear to part with it. No matter how many times she told herself it was time, it was too much to let go. It was the only piece of him that remained, the only thread that still connected her to that night. The rest of the world had moved on. She had tried to, but she couldn't. Not yet. Not ever. The police, of course, had closed the case. They had marked it as a drowning accident, as simple as that. No foul play, no suspicion. They had even told Eva that it was a tragic but all too common story, and that they were sorry for her loss. But there was no more to be done. The beach had been searched, the water had been combed, and yet there had been no sign of him. No body, just an empty stretch of sand. The case was closed, the file stored away in some forgotten corner of a police department office. Eva had never fully believed them. There had been something in the way the waves had taken him. So quickly, so violently. He hadn't even had time to call for help. He had just disappeared, like he was being pulled under by something more than the current. But the police had been satisfied with their conclusions, and her friends had, too. After all, it had been years. Everyone was telling her it was time to move on, to stop holding on to a ghost. But she couldn't. Not when the ghost was Liam. She sat in the dim light of her home, staring at the blank screen of her laptop. Her latest project lay incomplete on the desk, but she couldn't bring herself to finish it. Not tonight. Suddenly, her phone buzzed on the desk, snapping her out of her trance. It was Maya again. "Eva, I know you're upset, but you have to talk about this. You're not living. You're surviving, and that's not enough. You have to move forward." Eva looked at the message. The words, though well-meaning, stung. Maya didn't understand. No one did. She dropped the phone onto the desk, her mind swirling with thoughts of Liam. It was late on a Thursday evening when Eva, weary from another day of scrolling through her freelance work and ignoring the hollow space in her heart, found herself doing something she rarely allowed. She scrolled through TikTok. She had never been a fan of mindless scrolling, of getting lost in the viral world of the internet. But tonight, she couldn't focus on anything else. The algorithm had pulled her into a sea of random videos, each one more absurd than the last. The soft glow of her phone screen illuminated her face, casting fleeting shadows on the walls of her small apartment. She paused on a video. It was a vacation vlog, titled "Chasing the Sun in Portugal." The video was nothing extraordinary, just a group of travelers capturing a picturesque sunset on a quiet beach. Yet something about it caught her eye. The clip, only 2 months old, showed a panoramic view of the horizon, golden light spilling over the water, the last rays of the sun painting the sky in colors of fire. Eva's thumb hovered over the screen, ready to swipe past it, but then something stopped her. There, just at the edge of the frame, was a figure. She leaned in closer, her pulse quickening. The camera was shaky, capturing the wild beauty of the ocean waves crashing against the shore. But in the background, where the light and shadows danced across the sand, there was a man. His broad shoulders were familiar, his posture unmistakable. It was Liam. Eva's breath hitched as the video continued to play, but she couldn't tear her eyes away. There was no doubt. The man in the video was her Liam. He wasn't looking at the camera, his back to it, as he appeared to be walking away from the beach toward a group of people gathered by the water's edge. The video had been taken just moments before the travelers began capturing the golden sunset, but as the camera zoomed in, a brief but telling moment occurred. Liam was arguing with someone. His movements were sharp, his gestures forceful, as though the conversation wasn't friendly. Eva's heart pounded in her chest, her hands trembling as she rewound the video, playing the scene again and again. Her eyes narrowed. This was no mistake. This was him. The video was posted by a stranger, a name Eva didn't recognize, nor did it seem to have any obvious connection to Liam's life. The date of the video confirmed what she had already suspected. It had been uploaded 2 months ago. Eva's mind raced. How could this be? How was Liam in Portugal, arguing with someone, seemingly alive and well, when the police had declared him dead? How had she missed this? She quickly glanced at the screen again. There was only a fleeting glimpse of him, but it was enough to stop her heart. Her Liam, the man she had been sure had drowned, was alive. Her hands began to shake. She tried to steady herself, but her mind was in chaos. She quickly snapped a screenshot of the moment. Liam's familiar face caught in a brief moment of frustration, before the video moved on, focusing again on the sunset and the group of travelers. She wasn't sure what to do next, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't let this go. This was her chance to find him, to prove that he hadn't just vanished into thin air. For the next several minutes, she did nothing but sit there, staring at the image of Liam on her phone. Her breath came in shallow bursts, as she felt the familiar pang of hope flare up in her chest. Hope. She hadn't allowed herself to feel that in years. Eva pulled herself together and opened the app again, her fingers moving quickly as she tried to dig deeper. She scrolled through the profile that had uploaded the video, looking for any clue that might tie it to Liam. But the user's posts were filled with generic travel videos, happy, carefree footage of strangers smiling and laughing in far-off places. Nothing about Liam. No information. No connection. Eva's gaze drifted back to the video. Her heart was pounding, her thoughts scattered. The more she looked at it, the more it felt like she was staring at the edge of a secret. A secret Liam had been hiding all along. How long had he been in Portugal? Why hadn't he contacted her? Was he in trouble? The questions swirled like a vortex in her mind, and the more she tried to catch them, the faster they spun out of control. Eva clicked on the comment section below the video, desperate for any hint, any shred of information. But most of the comments were filled with standard tourist praise, excitement about the sunset, and wanderlust. There was nothing about the argument, nothing about Liam. She paused. Her fingers hovered over the screen as a thought crept in her mind. What if the video had been uploaded intentionally, as though someone wanted her to see it? What if it was a message? Eva's heart thudded in her chest. She needed to know more, to piece together the fragments of this puzzle. She needed to find Liam, to understand what had happened that night and why he hadn't come back. With trembling hands, she messaged the video uploader, her words spilling out in a rush. Hi. I saw the video you posted from the beach in Portugal. Could you tell me who that man is in the background? The one near the water. I think I know him. She hit send before she had a chance to second-guess herself. And then she waited. The walls of the police station were as cold and sterile as they had been when Eva first walked through them, 4 years ago. The air was thick with the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee. The faint sounds of ringing phones and murmurs from officers echoed around the cramped space, but none of it felt real to Eva. The officer there barely looked up, nodding in a noncommittal way when she mentioned her name. She had been here so many times before, trying to get their attention, try to explain that something didn't add up. But today she had proof. A video. A glimpse of Liam. Eva's mind raced as she sat in the waiting area, clutching her phone tightly. She replayed the video over and over in her head, the fleeting moment where she saw Liam arguing with someone on that beach. She couldn't believe it was happening. After years of the void, of the emptiness, this was the first real lead she'd had. It had to mean something. A few minutes later, she was led into a small, dimly lit office. A woman was sitting at the desk, her eyes dark and calculating as she looked over the papers on her desk. "You must be Eva Morgan," Detective Nora Reeves said, her tone flat but not unkind. "I've been briefed on your case." Eva nodded, barely able to meet the detective's eyes. She had heard of Nora before. The detective had worked the case initially, but after the official ruling of an accident, she had passed it off to a less experienced officer. Now, with the case still cold and all hope seemingly lost, Nora had returned to look into it again. But Eva had no illusions about the detective's interest. She wasn't here to help. She was here because of procedure. "I've seen the video," Eva said, her voice quiet but firm. "It was posted 2 months ago. The man in the background, he's my fiancé, Liam." Nora raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. She looked skeptical, which wasn't a surprise. "I know this sounds crazy," Eva continued, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of the desk. "But the video, it's him. I know it's him. The police said he drowned, but there's no way. I need to check it. Please." Nora sighed, rubbing the back of her neck, as if she had heard this request 100 times before. "All right, let's see this video." Eva quickly pulled up the TikTok video on her phone, showing the detective the part where Liam could be seen in the background. She held her breath as Nora watched it, her expression unreadable. After a long pause, Nora nodded slowly. "It could be him," she said, still sounding unconvinced. "But it's a little grainy, and there's no concrete proof. It could also be someone who just looks like him." "But it's not," Eva said, her voice rising slightly in frustration. "You can see the way he walks, the way he moves. It's him. Look closer." Nora took the phone and clicked on the video again, this time zooming in on the figure in the background. She paused it at the moment when the argument broke out, but the figure remained distant, unclear. Nora opened her laptop and began running the video through a series of checks. The screen flickered briefly before she clicked through the files. As the seconds stretched on, Eva's anxiety built like a pressure cooker. It could be nothing, or it could be something more. But either way, we'll need to open the case again. I'll need to verify the authenticity of this footage, and we'll have to trace the person who posted it. Eva's breath caught in her throat. "So, what does this mean?" she asked, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and hope. "Are you reopening the case?" Nora nodded slowly. "Yes, we'll reopen the investigation. Officially." The words hit Eva like a tidal wave. She felt like she was floating, like she had been cast adrift into a new world where everything she had believed was being turned on its head. "I'll need more time," Nora added, glancing at the clock on her desk. "But I'll have my team run a few more checks. We'll track the uploader and see if we can get a lead on Liam's whereabouts." Eva nodded, her mind reeling from the sudden change. There was so much more she needed to know, so many more questions that needed to be answered. As Nora stood to leave, Eva couldn't help but ask, "Do you think he's still alive? After all this time?" Nora paused in the doorway, her face momentarily softening. "I don't know," she said, the words hanging in the air. "But there's always a chance, and I think you deserve that chance." Eva sat in the small, dimly lit coffee shop, her fingers wrapped tightly around her mug as she waited. Daniel had always been distant, even when Liam was still around. There was something about him, an unease, a reluctance to get too close, that had always set Eva on edge. He wasn't like Liam, who had a natural warmth about him. Daniel was closed off, often brooding, lost in his own thoughts. The last time Eva saw him, she had been full of hope, certain that he would help her navigate the uncertainty surrounding Liam's disappearance. But he had shut down, told her to move on, and made it clear that he wasn't willing to discuss Liam's vanishing any further. He had always been reluctant to talk about anything personal, especially about his family. The door opened, and Daniel stepped inside. His expression softened when he saw her. but only just. "Eva," he said, his voice low and almost apologetic. "I didn't think I'd see you again." Eva met his gaze, trying to read the emotions swirling behind his eyes. "I found something. A video, Daniel. From 2 months ago. It's of Liam. He was in Portugal. And—" "Stop." Daniel's voice cut through hers like a knife. He slammed his coffee cup down on the table, his eyes flickering with something like panic. "What are you talking about? That's not possible." Eva's heart skipped a beat. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "It's him, Daniel. I know it's him. And I know there's more to this than just an accident. The police were wrong. You know that, don't you?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hand running through his hair. His eyes darted nervously, and Eva could feel the unease radiating off him. He was hiding something. She could see in the way he couldn't meet her gaze for too long. "I don't know what you're talking about," Daniel muttered, his voice defensive. "I don't care about any stupid video. Liam's gone, and that's the truth." But Eva wasn't buying it. There was something in his tone that didn't sit right. Something was slipping through his facade. "I think you know more than you're telling me, Daniel," she said, her voice low but firm. "I think you know exactly what happened that night. What happened to Liam?" For a moment, Daniel said nothing. His face was pale, his lips pressed together, as if he were wrestling with his own thoughts. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand," he said, his eyes flicking to the side. "I couldn't tell you. It wasn't just Liam. It was bigger than that. There were things I couldn't say. You wouldn't believe me, Eva, and you're better off not knowing." Eva's stomach twisted. She didn't know what he meant, but she knew one thing for certain. Daniel knew exactly what had happened, and he was hiding it. "I want the truth, Daniel," she said, her voice barely containing the anger and hurt that had been building up inside her. "Tell me what you know. Now." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, his expression torn. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say another word, a figure appeared in the doorway of the coffee shop. A woman, dressed in black, her face partially obscured by the hood of her jacket. She glanced briefly at their table, then walked quickly toward the exit, as if trying to avoid being noticed. Eva's instincts flared. She had seen that woman before. The marina. The night of Liam's disappearance. Without thinking, Eva stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She rushed toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest. But by the time she reached the street, the woman was gone. The small, worn-out laptop sat on the corner of desk, its once glossy surface now scratched and faded from years of neglect. This was Liam's laptop, the one he had used every day, the one that had likely held the answers to so many of the questions she had spent the past 4 years asking herself. It had sat untouched, gathering dust, since that night. And if there was a chance that the answers were inside this laptop, she had to know what they were. The familiar login screen appeared, the one that Liam had always used. She had seen it so many times, though she'd never paid attention to the password. But now, the task before her seemed daunting. What if she couldn't get in? What if all of this, the clues, the videos, the messages, came to nothing? Eva typed in the first thing that came to her mind, Liam 1991. She hit enter and held her breath. The screen went dark for a moment, but then a message appeared. Incorrect password. She frowned, frustration bubbling up inside her. "No, it can't be this hard," she muttered, shaking her head. She sat back for a moment, trying to think. Liam had always been practical, simple. Surely there was a password she could guess. She tried a few more combinations, his favorite sports team, his childhood pet's name, but each time, the screen flashed with the same discouraging message. Sweat beaded on Eva's forehead, the pressure building. She had to find a way in. There had to be something in here that would make sense of everything. Then, a thought struck her. The word he had used when they first met. The one that had seemed so unimportant at the time, but now, in the context of everything, felt so significant. She quickly typed it in. Sunset, the name of the beach where they had gotten engaged, the place where everything had changed, the place where she had said yes. She hit enter, her heart pounding in her chest. "Welcome, Liam," flashed on the screen. The laptop had unlocked. She clicked through the various folders on the desktop. Most of them were filled with photos from their trips, documents for work, some old sketches from his art projects. But as she scrolled deeper, she found a folder that made her pause. It was labeled Journal. Inside were several video files and documents, some of which were password protected. She clicked on the first video file and waited as the screen came to life. The video began with a shaky camera, as if the person filming wasn't quite sure what to focus on. Then, a clear shot of Liam came into view. His face was tense, almost as if he was recording this for a purpose. The date at the bottom of the screen showed it was taken just a few days before he disappeared. Liam spoke directly to the camera, his voice low and filled with unease. "If you're watching this, I don't know if I'll be around to explain. I don't know how much time I have, but I need to say something." Eva's breath caught in her throat. The last time she had seen Liam, he hadn't said anything like this. What had happened to him? Why had he felt the need to record this? He looked down briefly, as if searching for the right words, then continued. "I need to tell you, Eva, things aren't what they seem. I'm not who you think I am, and I don't know how to tell you the truth. How to explain everything without making it worse." He paused again, running a hand through his hair, his face filled with regret. "I'm afraid if I tell you everything, you'll never look at me the same way. But I can't let you be in the dark anymore. I can't keep living this lie. I just need you to know that I love you. And if I don't make it out of this, I need you to know that." The video ended abruptly, leaving Eva staring at the screen, her heart racing. What was he talking about? What lie was he referring to? Eva replayed the video, then skipped ahead to the next file, hoping to find more. This time, it was a diary entry. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Every time I think I'm close to getting out, they pull me back in. I'm not sure who I can trust anymore. There are things happening that I don't understand, but I know this. It's bigger than me. Bigger than anything I ever imagined. And if I don't figure this out, Eva, they'll come for you next. I have to disappear. For your sake." Eva's hand shook as she read the words, her mind struggling to process the meaning behind them. What was he mixed up in? And more importantly, why had he never told her any of this? She scrolled through more of the journal entries, each one revealing a growing sense of fear and confusion. There were mentions of them, of people watching him, of secrets he couldn't keep hidden anymore. But there were no names, no faces, just a constant sense of looming danger. Eva closed the laptop, her mind spinning with all the new information. Why had he kept it from her? Eva sat at her desk, the laptop still open in front of her, the video and the journal entries playing on a loop in her mind. Liam's final message had shaken her to her core. The man she thought she knew was not who he had appeared to be. And now, it seemed, there were even more secrets to unravel. Eva had no more. The next morning, she met with Detective Nora Reeves at the station. Eva could barely contain her anxiety as she sat across from the detective, who was quietly reviewing the files. "I've gone through the footage from the marina," Nora said, her voice steady, but with a hint of concern in her eyes. She looked up at Eva. It was a lucky break. There was a security camera positioned on the dock that caught the tail end of what happened that night. Eva leaned forward, her heart beating faster. "What did you find?" Nora clicked the mouse, bringing up the footage on her laptop. The grainy image flickered before settling into focus. There in the corner of the screen was Liam, walking briskly along the edge of the dock, his back turned to the camera. And then, just a few feet behind him, was a woman. She was wearing a dark coat, her face partially obscured by a scarf and sunglasses. But Eva recognized the posture immediately. She had seen that woman before, in the video, in the vague memory of that night. Nora paused the footage. This woman is on the camera for only a few moments, but it's clear she's with him. They were in conversation. But she left before the police arrived, just after Liam vanished. Eva stared at the image, her mind racing. "Who is she?" "I don't know yet," Nora said, clicking through the footage. "But I've got a lead on her. I've already had our team pull her name from a few records. She's been identified as Celine Armas, a former employee of the British consulate in Lisbon." Eva blinked, surprised. A diplomat? What was she doing with Liam? Nora leaned back, her fingers running through her hair. "That's what we need to figure out. But here's the kicker. Celine Armas doesn't appear to have any official connection to Liam. No records of her, even knowing him before that night. There's no reason for her to be involved." Eva's stomach churned. A former diplomat. What had she been doing with Liam? And why was she never mentioned in the police report? This wasn't just a casual encounter. There was something about this woman that didn't add up. Nora continued, her voice low. I've already started digging into her background. I've asked our team to cross-reference her with known associates, especially people with connections to high-level operations. She's been off the grid for a while now, but I'm starting to believe she may have played a bigger role in whatever happened to Liam. Eva's mind raced with possibilities. The connection to the British consulate. The cryptic messages. What if Liam had been mixed up in something far more dangerous than a simple disappearance? What if he had been forced into hiding because of the people he had become involved with? There's more, Nora said, interrupting Eva's thoughts. I've put in a request to pull her phone records, her movements the night Liam disappeared. But so far, there's a clear gap in her location tracking after she left the marina. I'm sending a team to check out her last known address. We're going to get answers, Eva. We're not going to stop until we know exactly what happened that night. Eva nodded, her thoughts racing. She couldn't wait. She couldn't sit here and let this woman slip through their fingers. Can I come with you? She asked, her voice firm, though she knew it was a long shot. I need to know everything. I have to find Liam. Nora hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod. I'll see what I can do, but you'll have to keep your distance. We can't risk tipping her off. Eva sat in the back of the unmarked car, the city lights flickering past her window as she stared at the documents spread out before her. The last few hours had been a blur. The investigation into Celine Armas, the interviews, the discoveries. But now, she was looking at something that made everything else seem trivial in comparison. A single folder in front of her, one she had never thought she'd see, was filled with the truth of Liam's past. Nora had arranged for the team to bring in some files about Liam's former identity. It had been a carefully guarded secret, hidden beneath layers of falsehoods and documents, and even now had to face the consequences of it all. Eva, Nora's voice broke through her thoughts. I need to look at this. Eva nodded, her hand shaking as she picked up the file. She had asked to see anything related to Liam's past. She had to know who he really was, what he had been hiding, why he had left so many things unexplained. Nora opened the file, revealing a series of documents from Liam's time in the UK. At first, everything looked normal. Birth certificates, school records, official letters. But then, at the bottom of one document, she found a name she didn't recognize. Liam Carter was not who he said he was. Eva's heart dropped as she read the new name, Thomas Blake. Her breath caught in her throat. This couldn't be right. It had to be a mistake. Nora spoke again, her voice steady but laced with concern. Liam Carter is a false identity. He's been living under that name for years. His real name is Thomas Blake. He used fake documents to create a whole new identity. Eva's mind reeled. Why? Why would he do that? What was he hiding? Nora's fingers ran over the documents, flipping through pages that revealed more of Liam's fabricated past. Multiple addresses in the UK, all under different names. An old passport, heavily altered. Even bank accounts with false information. It was all there. The evidence that Liam, the man she thought she knew, had built a life on lies. The man who had proposed to her, who had held her in his arms, had never truly existed. He was hiding from something, Nora said, her voice grim. Or someone. It's clear that Thomas Blake wasn't just running from a mistake. He's been running from a life that doesn't belong to him. Eva stared at the papers in disbelief. What does this mean? What could he possibly have been involved in? Nora didn't answer immediately. She flipped through more documents, her eyes scanning each one. Then she stopped and looked up at Eva. There's something else, she said, her voice lower now. It looks like Thomas Blake was involved in some kind of operation, a covert operation, possibly related to intelligence or government work. There are connections to people with a lot of power, people who could have forced him to change his identity. Eva's heart raced. The world she thought she knew was turning upside down. The life she had shared with Liam, now Thomas, was built on a foundation of secrets and lies. He had been running from something, or someone. But what? And why had he hidden it all from her? Does this mean he was never who I thought he was? Eva asked, her voice shaking with the weight of her realization. Was I just a part of some cover-up? Was I ever important to him? Or was I just a pawn in something I don't even understand? Nora's expression softened, but her eyes were sharp with the knowledge of how deep this ran. I don't think it was like that, Eva. I think Liam, or Thomas, loved you. He was trying to protect you, which is why he kept all of this from you. The truth is, he didn't want you involved. He didn't want you to get caught up in whatever it was he was running from. Eva felt her heart break all over again. The man she had known, the man she had promised to marry, had been a stranger. He had lied to her, kept her in the dark about his true identity. But worse still, he had kept her in the dark about the danger he was in, the danger that had forced him to disappear. She looked down at the papers, her hands trembling as she held them. "Where do we go from here?" she asked, looking up at Nora. "What happens next?" Nora closed the file slowly, her gaze never leaving Eva's. "We keep going. We track down these people, the ones who force him to live this lie. We find Celine Armas, and we find out what happened to him. We get the truth, whatever it takes." Eva nodded, her resolve hardening. She didn't know what this truth would cost her, but she couldn't stop now. The drive to the abandoned warehouse felt like a journey into a world that Eva wasn't sure she was ready to confront. The road was desolate, winding its way along the coast, the salty scent of the sea filling the air as they neared the dilapidated building. As they pulled up to the warehouse, Eva's breath caught in her throat. The building loomed in front of them like an abandoned fortress, its walls weathered and decayed by years of neglect. The large metal door was rusted, the windows shattered, and the air smelled of mold and salt water. It was a place forgotten by time, a relic from another era. But to Eva, it felt like the epicenter of everything, the key to understanding what had happened to Liam. They parked the car and stepped out, the cold wind from the sea biting at their faces. Eva pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders as they made their way toward the entrance, the crunch of gravel beneath their feet the only sound in the otherwise quiet night. Nora led the way, her flashlight slicing through the darkness as they approached the heavy metal door. "I'll check the door," Nora said, her voice low but confident. She moved swiftly, pulling out a set of tools from her belt and getting to work on the lock. Eva stood back, watching the detective with a mix of awe and anxiety. The anticipation was unbearable, and the darkness of the night made everything feel even more ominous. It took a few minutes, but with a quiet click, the door creaked open. They stepped inside, the scent of old wood, dust, and something faintly metallic filling the air. The warehouse was large, the ceiling towering above them, supported by steel beams that had long since rusted. In the dim light of their flashlights, they could see rows of forgotten crates, old machinery, and scattered remnants of long-abandoned operations. It was like stepping into a time capsule, a place where secrets had been left to fester. "Stay close. We need to be careful." Eva nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. She couldn't help but feel like they were being watched, like something was lurking in the shadows, just beyond their reach. Every instinct in her told her to turn back, to walk away and leave this place behind. But she couldn't. She couldn't stop now, not when they were so close. They walked deeper into the warehouse, their footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. Nora led the way, her flashlight sweeping across the room. And then, as they reached the far end of the warehouse, Eva saw something that made her stop dead in her tracks. There, tucked behind a pile of discarded boxes, was an old, rusted metal door. It looked out of place, as if it had been hidden deliberately. Nora's eyes narrowed as she spotted it, too, and she moved quickly toward it. Without hesitation, she opened the door, revealing a small room beyond. Inside, it looked like an old photo lab, shelves lined with dusty boxes, stacks of faded photographs, and the faint smell of chemicals lingering in the air. Eva's eyes scanned the room, her heart racing with a sense of urgency. The walls were covered in old photographs, photos of people she didn't recognize. But then, she froze. There, among the scattered piles of images, was a photo that made her stomach lurch. It was a picture of Liam. In the photograph, Liam stood beside two men. Both of them were dressed in dark suits, their faces stern and unreadable. One of them had his arm around Liam's shoulder, while the other stood a little to the side, his expression hard. Eva's breath caught in her throat. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice shaking. Nora stepped forward, looking over her shoulder at the photograph. "I don't know, but this is what I've been afraid of. Liam, or Thomas, didn't just disappear. He was involved in something illegal, something dangerous, I'll have to run these men through the database, see if we can get any information on them. Eva's hand shook as she stared at the photo. She had always believed that Liam was the man she knew, the man who had proposed to her, who had promised her a future. But the more she uncovered, the more she realized that the man she had loved was only a small part of the story. The truth was darker, more complicated than she had ever imagined. Then, her eyes fell on a shelf in the corner of the room, covered in layers of dust and cobwebs. It wasn't much, just a stack of old cassette tapes, stacked haphazardly on top of each other. "What's this?" she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Eva picked up one of the tapes, its surface worn with age. The label was faded, but she could make out the words, Liam, scrawled hastily in black ink. Her breath caught in her throat. The man she had been desperately trying to understand. "I think this is it," Eva said, her hands trembling as she held the tape. This could be his confession, what he was running from. Nora stepped forward, her flashlight illuminating the dusty surface of the cassette. "It could be. Let's find out." Once back at the station, Nora set up a small player in her office, and they sat together in silence as the tape clicked into place. A voice crackled through the static. It was unmistakable. "If you're watching this, then I wasn't able to stop them," he continued, his voice strained, like he was speaking under duress. "I don't know if I can explain this clearly, but I need you to understand. I got involved in something much bigger than I ever expected. An operation, a scam, a cover-up. I can't say much more than that because it's dangerous." Eva's hands gripped the edges of the desk, her eyes wide, unable to tear her gaze away from the speaker. Every word Liam spoke seemed to pull her deeper into the mystery, deeper into a world she never thought he had been a part of. "They've made me do things I never thought I would. I can't keep running forever, and I won't let them hurt you, Eva. That's why I have to disappear. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't manage to stop them. It means they're still coming for me, and they're coming for you." Eva's stomach twisted. Who is he talking about?" she whispered, though the words were meant for herself more than Nora. Nora didn't answer. She, too, was listening intently, her expression tense. Liam's voice returned, this time more frantic, the words coming faster, almost as though he was running out of time. "I can't keep lying to you, Eva. I love you. I always have. But I couldn't let you get dragged into this. They'll use you to get to me. So I have to leave. I have to disappear. For your safety." The words hit Eva like a wave. He had done this for her safety. The betrayal, the lies, the secrets, it all came crashing down around her. He had disappeared because he loved her. The tape crackled again, and then Liam's voice came through, softer now. "If this tape gets to you, please know that I never wanted this life for you. I never wanted to pull you into my world. I wish things had been different. I wish I had told you the truth. But if you're watching this, then I failed, and I don't know how much time I have left." The last words on the tape were barely audible. "I'm sorry, Eva." The tape ended abruptly, the sound of silence filling the room. Eva sat frozen in her chair, staring at the blank player in front of her, her mind racing. The weight of the tape hung over Eva like a thick fog. She couldn't shake the words Liam had spoken, the last message he had left her before disappearing into the shadows. His love, his apology, and the terrifying realization that he had been hiding from something much bigger than either of them. It had all been for her safety, but that wasn't enough to quiet the fear gnawing at her. As she walked through the darkened streets of the city, her thoughts remained tangled in the revelations. She had to keep pushing forward. She had to find Liam, to find out who was after him, who was still hunting him. But there was something more pressing now, something she hadn't anticipated. A cold shiver ran down her spine as she reached her apartment building, the soft hum of the city in the distance. But her mind wasn't on the mundane noises of the night. No, something felt wrong. Eva unlocked the door to her apartment, hesitated for a moment, and then stepped inside, glancing quickly around the darkened space. The faint sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it was just the building settling, the neighbors coming and going. But the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and the uneasy feeling in her chest refused to dissipate. She moved through her apartment cautiously, flicking on the light and glancing around at her things. Everything seemed normal, just as she had left it. But her intuition, that sharp, nagging feeling she couldn't ignore, was telling her otherwise. Something wasn't right. The phone buzzed on the counter, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from Nora. "Eva, I need you to listen to me carefully. I have some information. Someone's been tailing you. Be careful. Don't go anywhere alone. We need to talk." Eva's heart skipped a beat. She quickly texted back, her fingers shaking as she typed. "What do you mean, tailing me? Who?" Nora responded almost instantly. "I've been tracking some of the movements around you. I think whoever was involved with Liam, that organization he was running from, they're still active. And they're watching you. I don't have confirmation yet, but I'm getting reports of suspicious activity near your apartment." Eva's mind raced. The room felt smaller now, suffocating. She moved swiftly to the window, pulling aside the curtain and peering out into the street below. The night was quiet, too quiet. There was nothing out of place. But her instincts told her to be alert, to stay vigilant. Nora's message came through again. "We need to meet. This is bigger than we thought. Don't trust anyone you haven't already vetted. I'll be there soon." Eva quickly locked the door behind her, grabbing her jacket and heading for the elevator. She didn't want to stay in her apartment any longer. "They're getting closer," Nora said, lowering her voice as she sat down. "I've traced some of their movements. They're tracking you now, which means whatever Liam was involved in is still in play. They think you know something, and they won't stop until they get to you." "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nora's eyes hardened with resolve. "Now we move fast. We find out who's still pulling the strings, and we get to them before they get to you." Eva swallowed hard, nodding. She didn't know what the next move was, but she did know one thing for sure. She couldn't trust anyone outside the small circle she had left. The walls were closing in, and time was running out. Eva sat in the dim light of her hotel room, the curtains drawn tightly against the early morning sun. The stillness of the room was broken only by the soft buzz of her phone. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the notification. A new message from the same mysterious account on social media that had uploaded the video of Liam at the beach. She opened it, her fingers trembling slightly as she read the short message. "Coordinates. Find the truth. Don't stop." But as much as the coordinates pulled her in like a magnet, there was something holding her back. She had been warned. Nora had explicitly told her to stay put, to let the authorities handle it. "You need to be careful, Eva," Nora had said earlier that day, her voice filled with concern. "This is bigger than you think. Whatever you think you're going to find out there, it's not worth the risk. Let me handle this." But Eva couldn't stop herself. She couldn't wait any longer. The fear, the uncertainty, the endless questions had built up to this moment. She had to find the truth, even if it meant going against Nora's wishes. She grabbed her bag, her hands shaking as she packed the few things she thought she would need. The coordinates on the screen were embedded in her mind. There was no turning back now. She was close, closer than she had ever been before. The flight to Portugal was a blur. Eva barely registered the hours slipping away, her mind consumed with thoughts of what awaited her at the other end of the journey. She knew she had to be cautious. If she was being watched, as Nora suspected, then every step she took was being observed. When she finally reached the coordinates, she found herself at the edge of a secluded clearing. There, nestled between the trees, was an old cabin. The wooden structure was weathered, its windows dark, as if it had been abandoned for years. The cabin's door was slightly ajar, and she pushed it open with a creak. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old wood. The walls were bare, save for a few faded photographs and a couple of rusty shelves filled with forgotten odds and ends. But as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she noticed something that made her stop dead in her tracks. In the corner of the room, lying on a table, was a stack of old files and documents. Eva moved closer, her breath catching in her throat as she realized they were related to Liam, or rather, Thomas Blake. There were papers, photographs, and maps. She began rifling through them, her hands shaking. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. These weren't just random documents. These were plans, detailed records of everything Liam had been involved in. But there was more. As she picked up one of the photographs, her eyes widened. It was a picture of Liam, or rather, Thomas, with a group of men. They were standing together outside, but it wasn't the men that caught her attention. It was the building behind them, a nondescript building, marked with a logo she recognized, the Consortium. The same organization Nora had warned her about. Eva's pulse quickened. This was it. This was the operation Liam had been trying to escape, but he had never been able to outrun it. Now, she was holding the evidence in her hands. Suddenly, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. Eva spun around, her heart racing, her breath catching in her throat. The door to the cabin creaked as it swung open, and a figure stepped into the doorway. The person was cloaked in shadow, their face obscured. Eva's instinct screamed at her to run, but she couldn't move. She stood frozen, her mind scrambling to process everything. The photo, the documents, the man who had just entered the cabin. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The figure stepped forward, the dim light revealing a face she knew all too well. It was Liam. Eva's heart pounded in her chest as the figure in the doorway stepped into the dim light of the cabin. She knew those eyes. Even after all the time that had passed, even after everything that had happened, she knew those eyes. "Liam," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. But it wasn't just a whisper. It was a cry, a gasp of relief mixed with confusion, hope mingled with the bitterness of everything she had been through. Liam, or rather, Thomas, stood in the doorway, his gaunt face cast in shadow, but there was no mistaking him. He was alive. Alive, but different. More ragged, more worn than the man she had known. His clothes were torn and dirty, his face drawn and weary, like he had spent the last several years running, hiding from something that was much larger than both of them. He stepped forward, his eyes filled with pain and regret. "Eva, I never wanted you to find me like this," he said, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. Eva stood frozen, her breath catching in her throat. She felt like she was seeing a ghost. The man she had been searching for, the man she had loved, was standing before her. But he wasn't the same. The years of hiding, the constant fear, it had all taken its toll. "You're alive," she breathed, stepping toward him, unable to contain the rush of emotions flooding through her. "But why? Why didn't you come back? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me?" Liam's eyes flickered with a mix of guilt and sorrow. He took a step closer, though he seemed to keep a careful distance, as if afraid to get too close. "I wanted to, Eva," he said, his voice breaking. "I want to tell you everything. I wanted to come back to you, but I couldn't. I couldn't risk it. Not when they were watching me. Not when they were watching you." Eva shook her head, her mind struggling to process everything. "Who, Liam? Who's been watching us? What have you been running from?" Liam closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering the strength to speak. He took a deep breath, and when he looked at her again, there was a hard, unspoken truth in his eyes, a truth that had been buried for too long. "Eva, I'm sorry. I've been running from a criminal operation, an international smuggling ring. They're bigger than anything I ever imagined. I uncovered something that no one was supposed to know, but I didn't have a choice. I had to expose them." His voice faltered. "I found out about the people behind the trafficking, high-ranking officials, businessmen, people with power and influence in the government, and they wanted to silence me." Eva's heart dropped, her mind spinning. She had never imagined something like this. "What kind of trafficking? What did you find out?" Liam's face hardened as he looked around the cabin, as if checking to make sure they were alone. "I found out they were using diplomatic channels to smuggle arms, drugs, and even people. It was all coordinated by people who had the means to cover up their tracks. And when I got too close, when I exposed them, they came after me." Eva's stomach churned. The idea that Liam had been entangled in something so dark, so dangerous, was terrifying. But the most terrifying part was the truth of his disappearance. He had run, had gone into hiding not just for himself, but to protect her. "I had to disappear," Liam continued, his voice hoarse. "If I had stayed, they would have killed you, Eva. They would have used you to get to me. I couldn't let that happen. I had to protect you, even if it meant walking away from everything we had." A wave of emotion swept over Eva as she took a step forward, reaching out for him. She needed to feel the warmth of his touch, to make sure he was real, that he wasn't just a figment of her fractured memories. But before she could touch him, Liam stepped back slightly, his gaze filled with a kind of sorrow she had never seen before. "I've been watching you," he said quietly. "All this time, I've been keeping an eye on you from a distance, making sure you were safe. But I couldn't let you get too close. I couldn't risk it. They would have found you. Eva's breath caught in her throat. You've been watching me? All this time. Liam nodded, his eyes pained. I had no choice. Every move you made, I was there. But I couldn't let you know. If they saw me near you, it would have been over. I thought about coming back so many times, but I couldn't. They were always watching. The weight of his words crushed her chest. All these years, she had thought he had abandoned her, that he had chosen to leave her behind. But the truth was far worse than she could have imagined. He hadn't left her by choice. He had stayed away because he had been forced to, because he had been running for both their lives. Eva's voice trembled as she spoke. Liam, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me enough to let me in? He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I didn't want to drag you into this. I didn't want you to get hurt. You don't understand how far-reaching this thing goes. They're connected to powerful people, people who could destroy everything. I thought if I disappeared, if I stayed hidden, you'd be safe. Eva's heart shattered as she realized the depth of the sacrifice he had made. He had disappeared, not because he didn't love her, but because he loved her too much to let her be caught in this world of darkness. So what happens now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. What do we do? Liam looked at her, his face filled with regret and fear. We keep moving. We can't stop. They're still out there, Eva. They know I'm alive now, and they'll come for us. But I won't let them hurt you again. I promise. Eva reached out to him then, her hands trembling, and this time, he didn't pull away. They stood together in the silence of the cabin, the weight of their shared history pressing down on them. But in that moment, she knew one thing for certain. They couldn't hide forever, but they could face whatever came next, together. And for the first time in years, Eva allowed herself to believe that they might have a future after all. The days since Eva found Liam, since they had been reunited in that cabin in the mountains, felt like a strange dream, a blur of emotions, questions, and revelations that had torn apart everything she thought she knew about herself, about him, and about the life they could have had together. But as the sun began to rise over the sea, Eva felt the weight of everything they had been through settling into something new, acceptance. They had found each other again, but the truth was far from simple. They weren't just running from the shadows of Liam's past. They were running from the people who would stop at nothing to make sure that truth remained buried. And yet, for the first time in years, Eva felt a strange peace, a sense of closure she hadn't even realized she needed. It wasn't the kind of closure that came from finding answers or closing chapters. It was the kind that came from understanding, from knowing that no matter what happened next, they had faced the truth together. Nora had been their lifeline, their protector. She had arranged for them to leave the mountains in the dead of night, giving them safe passage back to a new life. She had arranged new identities, protection from the authorities, and even the promise of a future free from the looming threat of the consortium. Nora stood in front of them at the safe house, her arms crossed, a reassuring smile on her face despite the dark shadows that clung to the edges of her eyes. You're safe now, she said. I've made sure of it. The information you gave me, it's enough to take down the operation, or at least cripple it. They'll be on the defensive for a while, but they're not going to let this go. You need to stay low, keep a low profile for now. Eva looked over at Liam, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. She saw the weariness in his eyes, the exhaustion of years of running. But there was something else there now, a quiet hope that had been absent when they first found each other. He was home, at last, even if they weren't sure where home really was. I can't thank you enough, Nora, Liam said, his voice thick with emotion. You've done more than we could ever repay. Nora shrugged, but the gratitude in her eyes was clear. I'm just doing my job, and keeping you safe is part of that. The air was thick with unspoken words, a strange mix of relief and tension. There was still so much left to unpack, so much more to understand about the operation they had uncovered, the people involved, and the lies that had been woven into their lives. But for now, they had a moment, a fleeting moment of peace. As Nora left them alone to process everything, Eva sat down at the small table, her fingers nervously tapping on the surface. There was a part of her that still couldn't believe everything that had happened, everything she had learned. The truth had come crashing down like a wave, and she had finally understood that Liam had never truly abandoned her. He had disappeared because he loved her too much to put her in harm's way. Liam sat down beside her, his gaze soft, but filled with the weight of everything they had gone through. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We have a long road ahead of us," he said, "but we're in this together. Always."